Hi everyone, this is not Jason. This is Ellen of CtrlAultDel, and we've had some requests for Maya tutorials, so here we are. I'm going to show the first Maya tutorial, and I was going to do it on rigging, and to make it a lot of fun, our first Maya rigging tutorial will be rigging wings. This wing right here in front of you is modeled by Jason Alt. I had him model one up for me. It's nice and fancy. It kind of goes with the character that we've been working with. So we're going to work with rigging wings. Now, one thing you can kind of first notice is there's only one wing, there's not two. That there is a one point where you're actually going to mirror across. But to make it easier, I just have one wing set up kind of view for me. Now with rigging, it does not matter if your mesh is one full physical model or if it's broken up in a whole bunch of sections. So for example, with this wing as it is, we have the very large spread wings out, we have a kind of whole group of middle wings, and then one kind of large muscle system for the wing setup. So they're all separate pieces, so when you're doing this for yours, it can be one giant thing that everything's already attached, or they can be separate. It really doesn't matter. Only thing that you do want to make sure of is that if they are separate, that you need to mirror them across as a whole, which means that you do need to group everything. That with rigging, it's very important to keep everything very clean and organized. So if you look at my outliner over here on the left, I've got my left wing group, which is my full group of the entire system, and then underneath that I have the wing mesh group. This is actually all of my geometry and all of the model pieces. Yes, they have tries, we hate tries, but this was modeled in Max and brought into Maya. So that's for all the tries. Again, tries are not going to kill you in rigging, it just means you have more points to skin. That's all. And skinning is tedious no matter if it's a clean, perfect mesh or not. So again, the idea is just make sure that it is, all your geometry is grouped together. So that way later, if you need to kind of hide it all, freeze them, it's nice and easy to find them all together. You want to keep your outliner clean. Other items I have in my outliner just to make the process easier when we get to the steps are a couple control objects that I made. I made some custom little curve controls. When you're doing rigging, we're going to be making a whole bunch of controls, so I just have some already pre-made. And they are custom, that they're little cube, little prism shapes, and maybe we'll do a tutorial on how to do that. It's really easy how to do that. But anyway, back to our wonderful wing here. For rigging wings, you need to think about movement. That's everything you always need to think about rigging, is what kind of movement are you creating for your animator. You want to make sure your animator has flexibility to use and work with the entire rig system, that they can create the movement that the character itself is going to need. So the idea of a wing, think of this, is this an actual bird where you're going to have a very articulate wing system of the different kind of flapping that a bird needs to do? Or is this something more of a decoration character for that? Imagine with our character, she's not in this file because I wanted to keep the file size simple and the outliner clean. But for the character, her head would be around up here, her chest would be around up here, and she'd be standing, and these are kind of a system that would be applied to like a backpack on her. So think of what kind of movement you're doing. So since this isn't an actual bird wing, that the whole thing isn't connected with a whole bunch of, meticulous little feathers, this is a more fancy wing. It's actually rather simple, so we're going to create a very simple version of the wing system. So something that you can kind of think about and how complex you want your wing to be is look at how many feathers do you have. For a very specific technical wing system, you should have one joint for every single feather. For her, again, we're going to keep it simple because it's a much more decorative wing. It's not going to be complete locomotion. It's more just going to be kind of some fun flapping. So I'm going to create a joint for every main feather, looking at the large ones that are sticking out the widest. And then I'm just going to group all these little ones together kind of with the bigger wings. But again, if I was wanting to do this being very, very specific, I would create one joint for every single feather that I have. This is my main muscle system. You can kind of think of this as the spine of the wing. So I'm not worrying about all the little details it has. I'm looking at every single feather should technically have its own joint. Just to make the tutorial shorter and easier, I'm going to do one joint per main wing, main feather, and then have them actually just group together and move along with each other. But if you had big, like weeping angel wings, if you had big vulture wings, lots of feathers, you're going to have lots of joints. Again, it's rigging. You're trying to be as specific as motion as possible. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our joints. Like any sort of rigging, if you're in your perspective view, get out of your perspective view. Joints cannot be made in perspective. They will shoot off into the distance and they're never going to work in a line correctly. So I'm going to my front view. Again, if this was an actual flapping bird and the wings were flat, I would have gone to my top view. Let's think of what other viewpoint you can see the wings flat and be able to draw them out. So with this, again, thinking of the idea of articulation, of where the wing is starting from and what kind of movement you're actually going to be doing, I'm going to be using this kind of muscle piece as the spine of where it's actually going to start from and draw out, and then we'll add an additional joint for every single wing. So think of the first one as you're drawing out your spine, and then you'll draw out the appendages. So it's being rigging. We need to make sure we're in our animation menu sets. Again, that hotkey is F2. If I mention hotkeys, by the way, they're all PC. I'm on a PC. So F2 would hit to your animation menus. Gonna go to the skeleton menu, and the very first one, joint tool. Not gonna bother with my options yet. We'll kind of work with those a little bit later. So just opening up my joint tool. Like any rig system you're going to make, you always need a root joint for any appendage, any part of the character. It's where this specific limb starts from. So the idea of the wing, find one central piece that it's going to be starting from. I'm going to use this kind of round section here, and then we'll build off from that. Before you get into real specifics of where the wings should be, check your joint size. Just draw a couple joints out and make sure they're large enough to see. Right now that's kind of tiny, and I'm sure you would have a very difficult time viewing that. So I'm just going to go up to display, animation joint size, make those a bit larger so you can kind of see them. That's too big, but there, 0.3, 0.4, nah, we'll do 0.3. Just so you can see what you're working with. Something else I have on, since we're playing with the joints, in the window, little button options, all the way at the end, little skeleton. This is ghosting the skeleton on top of your model. Make sure that's turned on because your joints need to be inside the actual model, so you want to make sure you can still see them. Alright, now that I know my joints are good size, I'm going to create them. So again, starting from what will be the wings root joint, starting in the center, I'm going to hit to wireframe just to make sure the highlight and everything, you can see it. So starting from my center of my root, I'm going to go up to what is actually going to be the muscle structure and just going to acting as a spine. I have 6 main feathers, so I'm going to create 6 main joints. So doing this just kind of along the end, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and enter to create my chain. Now again, if you had a fuller wing, you would keep drawing these joints all the way out to the end of the wing. And even with this, I'm drawing them out as each single feather, and now I'm going to go back in and actually separate them into sections of the wing. If you think of almost a cartoon-shaped wing, wings you draw when you're a little kid, that they're almost like, you know, an M structure for flying a wing. Well, that M structure is actually sections that we're using to actually flap the wings. So even though you might have a really long joint chain here, you still need to separate what is the upper arm, the lower arm, the wrist section of your wings. As much detail as you need to help break it up into pieces. So even though this one is rather simple, I'm still going to break this up into having a shoulder kind of upper arm section and then an elbow for a lower arm section. So I'm going to separate these 6 joints into groups of 3. Before I do that though, I want to name it. We're going to name everything. And if it's rigging, you're naming everything. You want that outliner to be as clean and as specific as possible. So for my first joint, this is my root. So I'm just going to name it root joint. You can do this from your channel editor, your outliner, it doesn't matter. There's always a million ways to do everything. So this is my wing root. I'm not worrying about left or right now. Again, that's something you can do on your own. If this is the left wing, make sure you throw an L in there. If it's a right, an R. So my very first joint along the actual chain, this is my shoulder joint. So I'm going to have wing, underscore Maya. Again, if you've worked with Maya, Maya does not accept spaces. So I'm just doing SHLD as shoulder. And then 01, it's my first one. Making it easier on myself, I'm going to copy, down arrow to get to my next joint, paste, 02, down arrow, paste, 03. Again, it's naming. If you need to pause, name everything. We're going to have the wing shoulder joints. Again, I have 3 from my first half, and then my second half are going to be elbow joints. So wing underscore elbow 01, copy, down arrow brings you to your next joint, paste 02, down, paste 03, and that's the 6 that I have. Again, more than likely you will have more than 6 joints. You can also look at having a wrist section, a hand section at the very end. If you have like just a couple that you really want to be able to articulate, break them off and have their own chain there as well. But I now have my naming. Again, my beautiful outliner. If I click shift on the plus, it will expand the entire chain, and everything is named currently. But again, I need to break these up into sections. I can see by naming that I have 3 shoulder joints, 3 elbow joints, but I want to have something inside that really will let me allow me to break it up visually so I can really tell what's going on between a shoulder and an elbow. So I'm going to do that by actually changing the size of the joints specifically and then insert some. So I'm going to start with what was my first shoulder and give it its own root. We have the main root of the system, but I'm going to give the shoulder its own root joint to work with. So I'm going to use in the skeleton menu the insert joint tool. And I'm going to click exactly on that first shoulder joint. And it kind of flashes at you really quick, and then just enter is done. And visually what's actually happened here, if I turn off my polygons so you can see it a bit easier, polygons, there, is it actually inserted a joint on top of itself. If I look at my naming, I actually have joint 1 now. And if I look at my outliner, it's actually inside of there. Technically that's the wrong order, so let me see if I can switch that. There. Nope, you know what? We're just going to rename because that's going to break that. Never mind. Sorry. We'll insert that again. Insert. There it flashes. Enter. It's got a new joint. I'm going to change the sizes of them. So my first one will be actually wing, shoulder, root. And then the new joint, again, this is also why you name them beforehand so you can make sure you can see the difference instead of just a whole bunch of joint numbers. And then I'll have wing, shoulder, 01 again. And I'm going to change their sizes so I can see this. Again, we did under the display menu, animation joint size. That changes everything as a whole. I'm changing a specific joint. So if I grab my root joint, in the channel editor on your right, the very last attribute is radius. I'm going to bring that up to 0.6, make it a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to grab that joint that's actually inside, that was the original one I created, wing, shoulder, 01. I'm going to make that radius smaller, 0.4. So that way, visually, you can see there are joints on top of each other. And again, this is just breaking it up, so I'll have my shoulder section, and I'm going to do the same thing for my arms elbow section. Again, if you don't want to use shoulder to elbow, if you want to be more articulate and use better terminology of what the wings of a bird are actually called, go for it. I'm just simplifying it. We know what an upper arm shoulder is. We know what an elbow is. So doing the same for the elbow. Insert joint tool. Again, wherever you want that elbow section to start, click on your joint, enter. You've created a second one. Again, if I insert, kind of expand my outliner, you can see where it named it. Again, it's naming it underneath it. Technically, I could have selected the joint before it. So wing elbow 01 becomes wing elbow root 01. Again, capitals just to make sure I can see it, the breakup in the outliner. New joint is the wing elbow 01. And I'm going to do the same thing, I'm going to change their sizes. The elbow joint will be 0.4, so it's a little bit smaller. The root elbow joint will be 0.6, so visually it's larger, and I can start to see the sections separate. When you're looking at spacing between the joints, again, the spacing is a little bit wider. Doesn't matter, it's rigging. Pivots are what important. You want to make sure your pivots are set up correctly. So the fact that, select this again so you can highlight them. They're along the spine of this kind of muscle. That's what I want. I don't want them out there. But spacing, that doesn't matter. But something you do want to keep aware of is we're in the front view drawing out these joints. They look beautiful. Scroll back to your perspective view. They're totally in front of it. Again, joints are made on the actual X0 axis of your grid. No matter what window you're in, it's along the 0 grid line. So once you have them lined up beautifully in the front, switch to your left front view, switch to your perspective, switch to the top, whichever one's easiest to see it. Take that root joint, move it on back so it's inside your geometry. Again, this is where that ghosting skeleton button comes from. When it's off, I can't see it. When it's turned on, X-ray the joints, I can see where they're located. Again, if I wanted to be really, really specific, I would rotate these joints so they're actually in line with everything. Again, for this, I'm not going to bother. They're simple enough that it's not worrying about it. But if you had some really big curves going on, make sure that these joints stay in line with your geometry. Right now, they're all inside. They're good. Back to the front so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I've got these joints. I've got them named. Next thing is you want to make sure they're all going the right direction. More than likely, since you created them from one viewport, they should be completely fine. But you want to make sure that the x-axis of each joint is actually pointing to the child. We're looking at the actual orientation axis of the joint when it's created. If you switch back and forth between views when you create your joints, your orientations get changed. They get messed up. You just need to make sure that they are consistent. We're not going to be using any IK chains in this tutorial. This is actually going to be using hierarchy and constraints. But if you had IK chains, you would also need to make sure these orientations are correct, or things would start bending all out of place. So just to make sure, just to confirm your joints are okay, we're going to look at the component, the actual axis of the joint. The hotkey is F8. It's going to make your joints look blue. And then along the top menu line of next to animation, next to your saves, there used to be blue buttons, they're now gray. These are your components. Select the very last one, the question mark for miscellaneous components, and it's going to bring up the individual axis for the joints. If I zoom in even closer, you can see every little joint. Again, I'll just turn polygons off just for the view, make it simpler. Every little joint, my X is pointing to my next one. Again, this joint, they're directly on top of each other. It might look like it's down, it's actually okay. X to next, X to next, X to next. X is always to the child. The very last one, this is technically a null joint. Since nothing is going to be out here, it doesn't matter. But if you're already taking the time to come here, select the axis, rotate it to follow along with your joint chain in its hierarchy. X to what would be its child over in the next chain. Again, more than likely this should be set up perfectly fine, but if you had X's all of a sudden pointing down or something, you'd want to clean that line so that way your rotations will all be similar, and this is going to make the animation easier on yourself. I'm good, I'm happy. Clicking F8 on the keyboard again, and I'm back to just object mode for my joints. Bring back my model. So my initial chain is set up. It looks great. So now I need my feathers. Now with this, again, you're looking at pivots. You're looking at where these should actually be located. So I'm looking now at my large feathers. Again, technically speaking, every feather should have its own joint chain so you can control them and give it much detail as possible. But for now, I am just going to do one for each main feather. So back to the skeleton menu, joint tool. I'm not going to worry about connecting them into my spine yet. I'm just going to draw them out along it. You can do wireframe, you can do smooth shade, it's just up to what you can see. Just so you guys can see the joints easier, I'm going to do wireframe. So I've got my first one here. So I'm going to look at where that feather itself starts. It starts over here somewhere. Click, click, enter. Y to repeat the tool. Click, click, enter. Y to repeat the tool. Click, click, enter. That's a long one. Doesn't matter if they're shorter or longer. You're just looking at pivots. Next one, and then the last one. Again, making sure that these chains are not connected to each other. They need to be individual, so you will have individual feather control. And naming. Alright, so we had the wings. These are the feathers. Again, your own naming conventions, whatever you want it to be, but what I'm going to do, again, you can do from outliner, channel box, doesn't matter. I'm going to be naming these my wing feather joints. So I've got wing underscore feather. I'm going to name these feathers as A, B, C, D, E, and F, just so it helps break up between the numbers because each one technically has 2 joints. So this is wing feather A01. Copy my name. Down arrow to get to its child, and paste. This is A02. 2, not at symbol. So I have wing feather A01, wing feather A02. My next one is wing feather B01, B02. So I'm going to pause and name everything, and then come back and it'll all be magically named through the process of editing. Hi everyone, so we're back. We have everything named. Apparently I paused it wrong, so the interface might have jumped up a little, so if it did, sorry. But I've got all my feathers named, so now we are going to parent the feathers in. So I'm just going to hide my geometry again, just so you guys can see this easier. And we are going to do just regular old parents, child, parent, press P on the keyboard for parent. Nothing fancy yet. So I'm going to select my first feather, feather A, and going to select my first shoulder joint. Again, not the root, the actual shoulder. If you want to use your outliner, use your outliner. It could be even easier. If you're using outliner, hold down Control to grab that joint, and just P for parent, and they will connect. And I'm just going to go down the line, selecting the feather joint, then the wing joint it belongs to, P for parent, and connect all those guys up. So you're building a little hierarchy. Again, if you have a hard time trying to differentiate between them, use your outliner. Again, not the root, the actual elbow joint. Parent, child, parent, P for parent, child, parent, P for parent, and we have a wing system and all your joints should be together. Now to help kind of clean up your outliner, again, the idea of a good character rig at the very, very end, we'll have only one thing listed in this outliner. So I'm going to select my wing root joint, the very first joint. Just going to group it together as Control G. Name this my wing joints group. They don't need a capital. And I'm going to throw it in, little mouse, drag it into my wing group. So I've got the wing group itself, my meshes, my joints, keeping everything clean and orderly. And let's bring that geometry back up. So I've got all my joints. Again, more feathers, more joints, or find ways to simplify them and group them together. But once you've got all of your joints made, this is now the point where you would mirror across. Again, with rigging, very little can be copied from left to right. But if you had all of this made, if you have, another wing on the other system, you've got them named, mirror across, replace left and R's, or add the L's, then replace L's and R's. Mirror your geometry. This is the mirror side. Now you can mirror. Everything you do past this will not copy over. So we've got them all made, so we're now going to do everybody's favorite thing in the world with rigging, and that's skinning. Now with skinning with the wings, it is slightly different than what we do normal for a body rig. And that is that we want to skin to just specific geometry, to specific joints. I am not going to select everything. I'm not selecting all my geometry and then my joints and doing it as one. That would be crazy. Again, think of the idea, every feather has its own joint chain. So every feather is actually going to have its own skin information for them. So I'm going to have my muscle system, this kind of geometry, have its own skin, and then every wing will have its own skin as well. And I'm going to skin to specific joints. And I'm going to use my outliner for this. For this first piece, again, you're always selecting joints first and then geometry last. But I'm going to select my actual wing and root joint. In the outliner, I'm going to shift and select down to my last elbow joint. I am not selecting any of the feathers. Again, visually in the viewport, Maya highlights children, but these are actually not selected. Again, use your outliner for reference. The outliner will show you what is actually selected. I have the wing root to the wing elbow selected, and that's it. And then I'm going to shift select my muscle piece. Again, this would be the main piece of your wing geometry. And I'm going to go up to my skin menu, bind skin. I'm going to do a smooth bind, but I'm opening up my options for binding. Joint tool, I don't usually open them. Skin, I will open my option box. Now with this smooth bind, what you are looking for, what you are changing, is for bind to, I am not doing hierarchy. If I select hierarchy, it's going to grab all these guys in the bottom, and I don't want that. I'm switching it to selected joints only. Binding to closest distance is fine, because it's going to grab the vertices closest to each joint, so that's fine. Classic linear, it's fine. Honestly, I never really see a difference between these guys, so I just leave that at default. The thing you do want to change is max influences. When you have a character rig that's a full body and there's a lot of things that move different parts, well, five's good. This is rather simple. And again, I only had 6 main joints, two little, one for the elbow, one for the root, so I've got like, what, 9 things selected. If I set max influences to 5, that's a lot of blending. I don't need that much. So I'm going to set mine personally down to 3. If you have a lot of joints, you might want to do 4, but again, if you're sticking pretty simple, set your max influences to 3. It's going to make the skinning easier, as in the preset skin it gives you, it will not be as blended as much, and you'll have less work to do. So max influences to 3 and bind. And poof, it's pink. If you're in wireframe, it shows it's connected. Your wings change color to show that they've actually been bound to geometry. And if I do just grab my elbow root, for example, it's bound, it's bending. Again, I've got bad stretching because the skin always and always will need adjusting. That's the fun of skinning, but it's bound. So I'm going to do the same thing for the feathers. Now again, the feathers are going to each joint specifically. So these are actually really simple to skin. I'm going to select my joint, and I can just click through on the viewport. I don't have to do outliner here, because I'm grabbing the main section. Joint, shift select just the feather, skin, bind skin, smooth bind. I already set my options before, so I don't need to do it again. Smooth bind. Again, I can test it out. Look, the feather's moving. Next, so oops, joint first, geometry. I can do G. G will repeat the command, so I don't have to keep going up to the window. Again, G as in Garfield. Joint, feather, G. Joint, feather, G. Joint, oops, joint, feather, G. It's not really going to hurt you if it's out of order, but it just is cleaner. And then all the little guys. Again, decide where you want them to go. This you can do in other viewports. Again, oh crap. Well, I guess you can all see my problem. Let's undo those skinnings. And we're going to undo those parentings. Shift P to unparent. Oops, I don't even want that. I just want those. This just made this tutorial longer. Alright. grab these guys and move you back in. Again, technically, if you want to be really specific, we can rotate these guys in so they go in line with the actual feathers. You don't have to. Again, this is really simple geometry, really simple wings. They don't really need it. This is just making it prettier. Oops, wrong button. Why aren't you turning? There you go. Hit the wrong axis. Wrong one. Why? Okay. We're in perspective. Alright, sorry about that, guys. And then real quickly, I'll just repair on all these guys. Again, the original is still skinned. I don't need to worry about that. We should have checked that before. I don't know if I can add little pop-ups to see if I can do that to help prevent this. But anyway, did it really fast. Okay. So, back to skinning. Sorry. Feather. Joint. Skin. Fine. Smooth. Joint. Feather. G. 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 Alright, so what I was about to say, now that we're caught up, is those little guys. Look at your joints. Look at where they are. Decide what do you need to control them. Again, it's no right or wrong. I'm going to say this goes here. I'll go here. You can go to this one. You can go to this one. Let's see. You kind of point back from, well, let's see. We skip. We'll try to give one to everybody so everybody can have a friend. And let's see. You're going to have lots of friends because there's lots back here. Again, opposite side, doing the same thing. Grabbing pieces. Again, does not really matter which direction you go first. Joint first or geometry. Just skin, skin, skin. Again, I'm going fast just because it's tedious. You can always pause, skin all your guys, and then play the animation. Again, this is lots of little ones. You want to make sure every little wing gets selected. How to tell if it's actually been skinned or not, since geometry doesn't change color. Look at your outliner. The geometry itself will now be grayed out, which will mean it's locked, and in the inputs it now says skin cluster on it. Joints are still free attributes. Joints are still complete movement. Your geometry will be gray, showing that it's now actually skinned. Alright, so if I test this again, let's close that mesh group, I don't need it. If I grab my elbow root, for example, now when I rotate, the wings are moving! Okay, I skinned every feather. You might wonder, why did we not just parent every feather? Why did we have to skin everyone? Because that means you now have to paint weights on them. Well, seeing that they're just very simple one joint chains, I actually don't need to bother painting any weights. That they're going to move just fine on their own, since it's a very simple skin. But if you want to have more control, if you want to have more detail, that's why you're skinning. If you parent, it's just geometry following a parent. It doesn't actually deform. So if you're wanting some kind of deformation, that's why you're skinning. You can control where it's being parented. Again, technically, if I wanted to have even more detail, I wouldn't have done one joint from the tip to the end. I would have added in a second joint in the middle to actually add even more bending to this. That's why you'd want to skin. Skinning is going to give you more detail. Even though it takes more time to clean up, it's going to give you more detail. Alright, skinned. They're named. We're doing great. So next, again, save. It's always good. Let's save. Especially since we just had some issues. Let's save a copy. So, wings. Actually I had a whole name going, but just do wing demo 01. Okay. Save, friendlies. Yes, this is a student version because it's an education version because we're teachers. Alright, referring to my own notes, because I have notes just like you guys. Our wings are done for joints. They're connected. Again, this actual mesh should actually be cleaned up for the actual skin. I'll do that at the very end, so that way we can just get through the rig itself, because skinning on its own, that's painting weights, it takes time. There's a little bit, you know, small issues, but it still works. So I'll do the skinning at the end, because I will eventually make a video on just skinning. So we need to move on. We've got the joints. Next step with rigging are always your controls. Again, we're not doing any IK chains in this one. We're actually going to be using constraints. So we need to set up controls to work with. Again, the idea of a very good character rig, the animator will never need to select the actual joint. Joints will be hidden from view, and that way you will have just a control system up there. Again, think of it as the animator is playing with a joint, moves a joint, you broke your rig. Joints should only ever actually even be rotated. They should never be moved. So we're going to create controls that rotate our joints for us, so that way at the end we can hide the joints and not need to see them. So this is why, as I kind of mentioned, I had a couple little control-y guys made. Again, it's the idea of a character rig. Your controls can be anything you want them to be. It really doesn't matter. It's something that you can select and use to move and manipulate something else. So if you want to pause and make a whole bunch of shapes, go ahead. They can be circles, they can be squares, they can be 3D objects, they can be pointing at you, they can be up and down. It doesn't matter. Only thing that matters with rigging with these is scale. Again, with rigging, you never scale an object. If you scale an object in rigging, it's going to translate down into the rig and something eventually will explode. It's just going to happen. Scaling leads to exploding in rigging. It's bad. So if you make something and it's too big, do not scale the object. These attributes should always be at 1. Do never scale the object. Scale the components. Again, with Maya, right-click the object. This is curved, so it's control vertex. I can select everybody, and I can scale them down. Again, I'm not scaling object, I'm scaling components. If I go back to object mode, scale still 1. Never scale. If I do this, oof, that's bad. Always undo that. So we're setting up our controls. So if you want to pause, make some control objects, that's great. That's why I already had some, just to make this a little bit easier. And I'm going to go back to my front view so I can line everything up. And I'm going to use my square kind of cube control as my roots, and then my little triangle prismy guy as my separate joint ones. So I'm going to move, actually these are my originals. Let me duplicate, just Control D. Okay, so I'm going to move this guy to it be in line with my wing system. Again, rotate him so he's kind of in line with my little spine guy. Again, he's still actually a little large, so I'm going to go to Control Vertex, again by right-clicking, grab all of those without touching my joints, scale it down. There, that's better. Okay, and I'm going to move him in line. Do the same for my little prism guy. Again, duplicate, so I've always got them to go back to. Make him smaller by scaling the control vertices. He looks offset. Let's make sure his pivot is correct. Again, if you make a whole bunch of curves, make sure you go to Modify Center Pivot after it. Oh, I guess he is. And I'm going to bring him down. You know what? He's still too big, because I'm going to need 3 of these in here, 1 for each feather. Think of the idea of my cube. Cube is going to rotate the shoulder section. And then the little triangle is going to represent and rotate each wing. So I'm going to need multiples of these, so I'm actually going to make it even smaller. So that way I know I can fit these guys in. Here, outliner, I don't need you right now. Okay. Right click back to object mode, move you, that's better. Alright, because I'm going to have 1, duplicate, 2. I'm lining these up as close as I can to the joints that they represent. Again, we can rotate them and all, that's fine. 3. And next one I've got my root joint, so grab another square. Again, your shapes can be whatever you want, just make sure you can tell the difference between them. Again, if they're not perfectly lined up, like this one is representing the first elbow joint. It's back there. We're going to deal with that. Don't worry. You just want them visually to be as close as you can. They're not off floating in the distance. Alright, so I've got them all in line. Again, if I want to make them even closer together, I could, but this is fine. So the next thing is let's make sure they're in line with it. I've got all these objects. I'm going to switch over to views. Remember the whole problem we had with the joints? I'm remembering. We're learning. Let's move them all in line with each other first, so I don't have to undo a whole bunch of stuff. So they're in line. In line with the character. Again, if you wanted to rotate them, move them so they're in like rotated view, go for it. I'm leaving them like that. Okay, so I know they're in line. So now, pivots. Controls are about pivots. We have shapes that will be floating off and all around the character, creating all this wonderful magic, but if their pivot is not at the right place, it's just a whole bunch of waste of time. So I'm looking at the idea, I have my icons that I'm going to grab in a nice easy spot, but the pivots need to be on the joints. And with Maya, to change your pivot is the insert key on your keyboard. I'm doing one at a time. I'm going to use V for victory, to snap. And holding down my V key, again V for victory, I'm going to snap this, what will be representing the movement of the shoulder root to that joint. And then my very first control, which will be shoulder 01, to the shoulder joint. So these two will actually pivots be at the exact same spot. Make sure they are dead center, so it looks like the pivot doesn't change. The second triangle representing the next joint, the next shoulder joint. Holding down V, snap to the shoulder. Next one, and just go down your line. Again, the cube, the square represents the root, so those two will be on the same pivot point, and then down the line. This is why the icon, if it's offset, doesn't matter, because the pivot is at the correct place. Just making sure, and then I can just insert, and I'm back to my move tool. So make sure your pivots are snapped to the joint that they're actually controlling. Now, once your pivots are all snapped, again, if you look at your attributes in the channel editor on the right, since we did some moving, we did rotating, there's a whole bunch of garbage in here. Again, the idea of rigging for an animator, if an animator gets a rig and this is the values they start with, it's not clean. It's like I have to remember that my 0 is actually 48.601. That's going to drive your animator nuts. So once these are all in place, again, checking both views, you've got your pivots in the correct place, go ahead and grab all of the controls and go to Modify, Freeze, Transformations. This resets your attributes. It gives this new location as the new 0 value for translates, the new 0 for your rotations. Again, scale always at 1. So that way the animator has something nice and clean to work with. Alright, so we've got our controls. But guess what? We need to name them. Again, if you look at your outliner, you've got a whole bunch of control objects or curve objects. Everything needs to be named. Now this naming is actually really easy because we're just going to copy the naming from the joints and then add on a C for control. So for my very first one, I'm going to grab my wing shoulder root, double click it so it highlights, Control C to copy, grab it, Control V to paste, underscore C for control. Do that for all of them. Copy paste, copy paste. So we'll pause again, and then you'll come back and everything will be named. And we're back. Okay everyone, so if you look at my outliner, I've got everything named. So I've got my initial controls. Now since I have a lot of wing information here, I've got, again, my kind of spine of my wing, and then my feathers. We need more information in here to work with. And what we're kind of looking at is that this control, when I rotate it, is going to rotate the joint for me. But I have some things that I have to do for it. If I was to parent this joint to my control, well, it would remove it from the hierarchy and then just erase all of that time and all that work I just did. So I can't just do a parent. I can't do a parent constrain either, because we need to make sure that we have enough information that these joints are still on their own. So even though I made all of these beautiful controls, I now need to make a whole bunch of locators as well, and I'm going to make a locator for each joint. Now this geometry is actually fairly small, so my locators are going to look huge in this viewport. That's okay. A locator size doesn't matter. It's the idea that a locator, this is just under the create menu, go and create locator. A locator is going to have a pivot. That's all it is. If I zoom in on it, it's not showing. Apparently they're turned off for some reason. If yours aren't seeing them, go to show locators. There it is. It's huge, right? It's really ugly. If you don't want to use a locator, if you're having a size issue too, if you want to use something smaller, go for it. If you want to create your own little object, go for it. If you want to create a line that says like oops, not that, go away. If I want to do something like this to represent my pivot, because this is a curve, I can actually scale that down and just use that little center point as a pivot. Go for it. It doesn't matter. It's the idea that, again, it's an object. Let's use those. Forget locator. You can use, again, locator is already clean and set up for you. This one, I gotta center my pivot on it. But it's the idea that these are actually never going to be seen. We're using these to create almost a buffer. Think of it as a buffer between the joint and the control. That it's going to be just a pivot buffer to make sure that we don't mess up the system we made and that we can connect them. We're going to be using these as constraints. Because again, the idea of a constraint is going to control some attributes. If we did it directly to the control, well then we're not going to be able to animate because there's a constraint on there and those attributes are taken. So that's all this is we're using this to set up a buffer so we can control the rotation by this controller. So I made my little pivot guy. Again, if you have a nice large scene, use locators. They're easier. They don't render, so you don't have to worry about them. I'm going to snap it to my joint. Again, I'm going to wireframe just so you can see it easier, so my geometry is not blocking it from your view. Snapping it to my joint. Again, this one, there will be two, because again, we have the shoulder root joint and the shoulder joint. So I'm going to duplicate it in place, and then duplicate it again, snap it over to the next one, snap, snap, duplicate twice, so there's two there, snap, snap. Again, they're all kind of cutting out of the geometry. Doesn't matter, these are just pivots. Again, they should actually be renamed. These are, again, pretending they're locators, but these are going to be for orient constraints. So if it's a locator, if it's a curve, doesn't matter, just rename it off of what the wing joint is. So this is my wing, shoulder, orient. I'm just using ORI as orient, locator, LOC. Again, it's curve, locator, whichever, but it's representing my orient. And then this one's for the root. Again, I'm going to copy all that so I don't have to rewrite that every single time. Again, using my outliner, grab the one that's directly on it, and rename it as my O1. Grabbing my next one, rename it O2. Next one, O3. Next one, I'm representing elbow, so I have more to rename. This being wing, elbow, orient root. Recopy it, so I don't have to rewrite elbow every time. These eventually, again, are going to be completely hidden. They are just using it as a pivot buffer. And you'll see it once we start connecting them. You might think, God, there's so many controls to this is a waste of time. Don't worry, it'll make sense at the end. Imagine if there were more than 6 joints. Okay, all named. Now for these, we are using these to actually orient with, so that way that when our joint, when we rotate our control, it rotates the joint correctly. They don't spin, they don't turn. If you've done constraints before, you might notice whenever you apply constraints, something just like spins out of place. It changes direction. We want to make sure that when you're animating, that doesn't happen. That's what these are for. We're setting these up as a buffer with these constraints. So we're going to orient constraint your new little, again, locator, my butterfly wing curve. But your new locator control that you just made, we're going to orient it to the joint. So again, we are going to select the locator curve first, shift select your joint. Again, your geometry, if you're in wireframe, turns pink because it's just showing your connection. That's okay, don't worry about that. So it's your locator control first, shift select your joint, and under constrain menu, orient. Alright, now I'm doing this as purpose. If this happens, well, that's obviously wrong. That's bad. So this is why we don't do it to the control first, because we can't change those controls. Those we are already set up for animating purposes. So I'm going to undo and go back to my constrain orient menu, and I'm going to turn on maintain offset. What this is going to do is it's going to keep these. It's going to connect my rotations, connects my rotate attributes, but when I add it now, it doesn't split, it doesn't spin, it doesn't turn. It's keeping it in place. Visually, something else to look at too is my joint is now blue. My joint is oriented. It has the constraint on it. The control is still completely clean. If I rotate the control, that joint will actually rotate with it. Okay, you can kind of see my skin turning around with it. Everything's kind of getting muddled. I'm going to hide my polygons again just so you can see. So it's controlling my joint. Now this control, again, this is the buffer. This gets parented to the actual control you're going to be animating with. You know what? It's not that big of an issue since these aren't actually going to be animated, but something you should do, if I look at this now after I connected my constraint, I've got stuff in my outliner, and my attributes, I've got stuff in my translates. I'm not going to like that. I want to clean that up with a freeze transformation. If I do it now, it will work. If it gives you an error because you've already constrained, well, just undo. But let's go ahead and actually just freeze all those little transformations first so it's clean. Okay, so again, I'm constraining my new locator curve control to my joint. I'm selecting the locator curve first, shift select the joint, constrain, orient. Again, success shows that it's blue in the channel editor and it's on the joint. So I'm just going to do it again, being my locator joint, just using G to repeat the command. When you get to the doubles though, make sure that you grab the right one. I'm going to undo just in case. Again, my root, I want to make sure, you know what? I'm sorry I keep messing up this, guys. I know Jason says he messes up all the time, but I actually made 2 more than I need. Because I only have, oh, I don't. Never mind. Maybe I'll edit that out. What I wanted to say is when you're getting to the ones that have the double joints, make sure you constrain it based on your naming to the right joint. So if I've got my locator root for my elbow joint, I'm going to make sure I'm orienting my elbow joint. G. Orient. We're good. Sorry, ignore that. Again, making sure every single joint has one. This one didn't have it, so I'm going to make sure I get my elbow 1 to the elbow G. Now they're all constrained. Alright, now I can speed up again. Again, it's when you get those doubles, make sure you do the specific one that you named to the specific joint, making sure they are. So again, let's say that a bit cleaner here on the shoulder. When I get down to my shoulder orient, I've got my shoulder orient root selected, making sure it is orienting the shoulder root joint. And selecting shoulder orient locator 1 to the actual shoulder 1 joint. Again, visually what you can now see with these is right now if you try to rotate one of these, You're going to get kind of some weird deformations because the other ones are still kind of connected to each other. That's alright. And I rotate this one, nothing's going to happen, that's alright. It's the fact that the orientations are working, things are pink. And if I kind of go back to here, you can see that the inside joint is actually spinning. This guy's going to be a buffer. Again, he's okay. Undo that horrible rotation. But the inside joint is rotating, even though these guys aren't doing anything yet. It's the fact that we've oriented, again, the control to the joint. The joint's rotation will now be controlled by this little guy. Now again, the other reason why we're doing this as kind of a buffer is if we bring the geometry back up, this is inside the wing. This would be really hard to grab. Our really nice, clean, pretty ones are outside. They're nice and easy to select. So this is all about the pivot. It's all about controlling that rotation, and now we're going to connect them together. So I'm just hiding this again so visually you can see this clearer. We've got the locators constrained to the joints, so we know our orientations are working. We're now going to just do regular old parents, and this is not a constraint. This is a regular parent of this locator curve orient control to the control that I actually want to animate with. So I'm selecting my little bow tie guy first, shift selecting my really nice prism, P for regular parent. Again, what this is going to look like afterwards is when you rotate that prism, it will rotate too. It'll rotate the whole chain for you. So go ahead and go down the line and parent all the little locator curve controls to the ones that are actually used for animating. Again, locator first, shift select the control you animate with, P for parent. Again, when you get down to the ones that are on top of each other, make sure that you parent the right ones to them. Again, use your outliner if needed. You don't want to accidentally parent the wrong thing. Oops, again, grabbing curve, not joint. And then we got this one to here, this one to here. Alright, all these are parented. Again, if you look at your outliner should keep shrinking. Everything's getting connected. Now I need to parent all these guys together. Again, these are still technically all individuals, all on their own. Don't need that. We want to be able to animate them as a whole. As if we animate and rotate one, the entire wing moves, because that's what would happen. That's what would happen naturally. So starting at the end of the line, I'm going to parent them into each other. So I've got my little final elbow, select it first, shift select one before it, P for parent, and just go down the line. Again, I'm not doing anything different with the little elbows. This again was just a breaker so you can visually see where your upper arm, lower arm start from. They don't have to be parented different at all. Again, visually what should happen is when you parent everything together, all those little controls now have that one shoulder root control. If I rotate it, the whole wing will move. If I grab my elbow control, the whole wing will move. If I grab one in the middle, everything from below it will move. Again, think of this as you've just made all the little joints for the arm of this wing, but yet you can still see where the shoulder is and the elbow is if you want to help break up your animation. Again, if I turn my geometry back on, since we skinned, the geometry is moving. Again, still some things to edit there, but not worrying about it. Alright, everything's connected. So to help make this easier visually, you're going to hide stuff. Because again, you're like, Ellen, there are so many controls. Why? I don't know what to grab. We're going to start hiding things. Again, my little locator bow ties. Again, you can do this through the actual channel editor if you want to turn visibility to off. You don't ever have to type off, by the way. You can just do 0. 0 represents off, 1 represents on. It's binary code. But I'm going to hide them. If you don't want to do it through the actual channel editor, just select them and do Control-H, hide. Control-H, hide. We don't need these anymore. They've served their purpose. We've used them to set up the animation. They've got their little buffer, so these guys are still clean, but yet we can animate. So hide those all so it just makes it nice and clean for your animator, because they're not needed. So we did our constraints, we parented the locators into our controls, we hid the ones we don't need. We're doing really great. Technically speaking, you could stop. You've got movement. You can animate your wings. I'm going to show you one more little thing to add in that can give you a bit more detail in the wings. This is kind of an extra thing. I'm going to bring my polygons up so I can kind of show you what I'm looking at. That I have the ability to animate my wing going up. Again, if I grab my shoulder, I can bring my wing going down. Again, you can see where the skin is now doing something weird. I could grab shoulder and elbow, rotate them together, see that it's going to start folding on itself. If I was to grab every single control, again for animating, if I wanted to rotate them going up, wide, down, they're going to fold together. But let's say that you're folding these together down, you're animating, but you wanted this one to still be more. You wanted this one maybe to kind of be in a little bit closer. Going to add in an attribute that will actually animate and work with these wings, and that's going to be called a fan attribute. Think of the idea that right now this is moving technically the spine of the wing. The whole wing opens and closes because you're animating the spine. But think of this as fingers almost. We want to be able to control these without having to select a joint. Again, you should never have to select a joint in a rig. So we're going to add an attribute to all these little controls called fan, that when you turn it will actually let you animate this feather opening and closing. That's the wrong direction. Opening and closing. This is what I'm looking at. So we can add these all at once. You don't have to do this one at a time. So I'm going to select all my little controls, again my little triangles and my cubes, and at the modify menu we're going to go to add attribute. Alright, if you've never done this before, it's really awesome, really great. This is where you can really start customizing your rigs. Long name is the attribute that you want to create. This will be added to your channel editor on the right underneath visibility. So I was talking about fanning out, that this is going to fan out the feathers so you can control each feather. So I'm just going to call it fan, nice and simple. And that's it. I'm not going to change anything else. Later when we add in a tutorial on rigging hands, we're going to have fun with this window. But right now, name it fan, okay, that's it. If you look at your controller now in the channel box on the right, the very last one, it now says fan. If you middle mouse click it and drag in the viewport, nothing happens because it doesn't have anything connected yet. You made an attribute, now we need to actually connect it. And we're going to do a very simple connection. We're literally just going to do the connection editor. That's it. You could get more specific with set-driven keys. You could do expressions. You could do a whole lot of stuff. We're keeping these wings simple. We are just using the connection editor. So let's open it up. Window menu, General Editors, Connection Editor, third one down. Now what you're looking for here, on the left, you want your control. If it was already selected, it's already here for you. If nothing is here, click Reload Left, your control's on the right, going to be loaded in on the left. On the right, we want the joint. That's what we're controlling. So we've got, again, the main joint for each feather. I'm going to select the joint, reload right. And we're now going to connect them. We're going to connect when we move and change the fan attribute, that it is going to rotate the joint for us. So check this first on yours. Select the joint and rotate what would be this motion. This is a fanning motion. And look at what attribute is changing. I am rotating my Z attribute. Now based on how I'm grabbing it, I've got a whole bunch of stuff changing. This is actually going to be my Z attribute. So in my feather, the actual feather joint, if you look in your list, if you scroll down, you will find rotation, rotate. I'm going to open it up, and I want just my rotate Z. Now I can't select anything, because you always have to select the left first. This is the driver, this is what's being driven. So on my left, going all the way to the bottom, click on fan. You'll notice on the right stuff will start graying out. That represents things you're literally not allowed to connect to. Maya's trying to prevent you breaking things. Isn't that nice of it? But now if I look, I open my rotation, rotate is grayed out, but I can select rotate Z. Visually in the channel editor on the right, if you had that joint still selected, you're going to see it's yellow. Yellow represents a connection. Yellow's good. We like yellow. Another way to test that this actually worked, if you select your little triangle prism, you select your fan attribute. Again, I'm just using middle mouse button to scroll. It's scrolling and animating my feather for me. Whee! Now you can see there's a limitation. This is based on the skin. I can see I've got a little bit of an issue going on. So I've got a limitation of what's going to happen, of what I can and can't do. That's something that you could always set up with the set-driven key. Right now, we're just going to leave it as connections. So I'm going to continue down the line. And for this, you're only doing this for the little triangles, the feathers. Technically, those cubes didn't actually need it. If you had extra joints, you could have done it for it. So selecting my next control, reload left, next joint, reload right. Again, all the way on the bottom on the left, select fan. In the right, since you did it before, it should be in the same section. You just probably have to reopen it. Rotate Z. Go next, reload left, select the next feather joint, reload right, fan, rotate Z. I know it's rotate Z for every single one. I'm just going to continue. Because when we were doing the orientation at the beginning, when we made sure that the attributes, those little axes, the x's pointed to the same child, it made sure everything was consistent. So that's why I don't have to worry about checking every single one, because I know since I made them and did it before, it's working. So reload left, reload right, fan, rotate, rotate Z. Alright, again, since those cubes didn't need it, technically, I'm going to go remove that. Show you how to remove attributes if you made one you didn't need. So I'm on my cube shoulder rotate, shoulder root control. Under modify, delete attribute. I can select the fan, deciding no, you don't need it. Delete. Do the same thing for elbow guy, fan, delete. That way just my little triangles have it. Again, I can grab one at random, check my fan. Ooh, can wave. Hi there. Alright. My fans are up. My controls are working. Guess what? Your wing is complete. There's a whole bunch of other stuff you're doing. If you wanted to add in a twist feature, you could do the exact same thing. I could add a twist attribute, and where my fan is doing my Z control, a twist could have done my X, so I could go this way. You could add in a twist to every single one. There's so much more you can do to this, but this is a nice, simple wing, and it's complete. The wing on its own right now is just standing there completely alone. So something that you can do, again, to help clean up your outliner. You made a whole bunch of controls. Group them together, and select the very first control in your outliner, the wing shoulder root control. Just Control G to group it to itself. This is now my wing control group. And I'm going to drag, middle mouse, drag it into my wing group, so that way everything is now intact. Keep in mind, this wing group I actually have locked because this is not something you would ever actually move and animate. It's just to clean up your outliner, that's it. The controls themselves, that's what you can move, but not the wing group itself. Alright, looking at how you would connect this to your character. You more than likely don't just have a wing floating for no reason. It probably has a body attached to it, being a bird or, you know, a human figure of some sort. Your very first wing root joint, I would parent in somewhere along your character's chest. Think of what the clavicle is doing. The clavicle controls the whole arm. The clavicle is connected to a chest joint. This is behind the character, connect it to a chest joint. Same idea with these controls. This very first control that you have animates all those wings for you. But it would need to follow the character's body. So think of a spine control that's up top, that's near the wings. Think of a chest control you could make on its own, but something that is up towards the chest of the character around this area. Parent that first one to it. Well, you could even parent the group to it if you wanted. It would bring it out of this group and back into your character group. This group at the end you would actually link into your global control so it follows along with the whole character. and then you're done. And you've got a beautiful wing. Again, skin-wise, there's some edits here, but we'll just do a tutorial on skinning on its own, so that way you can really see how to edit skin. Again, right now, functionally, this is working. You've got the ability to animate the wings. I'm right now working with just this one front view. If I select all, just visually so you guys can see it. Throw in my perspective real quick. I can rotate forward and back, so I can flap this way. I can do a little twist feature depending on what the character is doing, and again that up and down motion so you can see it. But the wing is complete. So everything that we did, I did it again in a simplified fashion of the main 6 wing feathers this wing has. So think of the idea again, you can do this in a more complex fashion. If you have more feathers, more wings, more controls, but it's the exact same steps. If you break it down into the steps of just okay, I'm doing my joints, I make my controls, do my orient constraints, and then add your extra details, it's really not that hard. Time consuming, but not that hard. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please, if you have questions, go ahead and ask them. If I went too fast, sorry about that. I know I talk fast sometimes, so that's what pause is for, and little bits of rewind. So if you have questions or comments, please post them. If you liked this video, this tutorial, please like it on YouTube and share it with your friends. If you want more Maya tutorials, let us know. Again, I'm going to start with rigging tutorials, but if there's something really specific you want to learn, hey, how do I rig this? Go ahead and let me know. We take options, We do what we like here, so if there's something you want to learn, let us know. We'll make a tutorial just for you. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you come to the Maya side of the animation world. It's really wonderful. You can have so much fun over here and lots of customizing with rigs. So thanks guys. See you next time.